All right, so it's 7 o'clock, and I'm going to call this meeting to order. As always, we start our meetings with public comment. If anyone in the room has public comment, or more likely maybe online. Okay. With that, we're going to get right into the really exciting things with our fiscal year 2027 tax rate. And
yes.
Eric?
So it's that time of year when the board sets the tax rates. The tax bills need to go out by July 15th, so we have a process where we have to print the bills, get the education rate, get them stuffed and mailed to our residents for the tax payment due August 16th. I think we settled up this year. So the grand list was finalized this past week by the assessor's office and our listers. Had a value of $2.185 billion. It's an increase of about 1.65%, just over $35.5 million from the last year. And it's approved at town meeting day was just over $9 million in property taxes. So that requires a property tax rate of 41.23 cents per $100 of assessed value. That's just over 2.25 cent increase from FY26. When the budget was presented at town meeting, we projected that rate increase was more like 2.42 cents. So good news, the rate is being, you're asked to authorize a rate that is lower than we projected, so that's always good. We looked at our benchmark with our median assessed home in town, $300,000. That increase in municipal property taxes would be about $69 per year, or about $5.75 per month. We've also included, Shirley puts this together, the half cent on the rate for the ERF that was approved on town meeting day. Based on the grand list, that will raise just over $109,000 for FY27. Shirley's prepared the rate sheet she does every year for the board. We need to consider a motion to set the tax rate for FY27.
Does anyone have any questions for Eric?
Was there anything, I think we assumed a flat, pretty much flat, right? So is there anything in particular that, where we got $35 million more? Or?
I need to dig into that a little bit more with the assessor's office, the grand list, because it was more than I thought it would be, which was good.
Right.
I can follow up with the board on that to see what it's like.
Definitely the direction we like to see it go in. Any other questions? If not, there's a motion.
I move to set the fiscal year 2027 municipal property tax rate at 41.23 cents. Second.
Any other comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
4 ayes, the ayes have it. All right, and with that, we'll move on to the tax increment financing in the growth center. And I know we have some folks joining us. If you want to come to the table, that would be great.
Like a presentation on the queued up here.
All right.
Thank you.
Fair.
My notes on the items.
I think so.
All right, so good evening, everybody. We're excited to share a lot of information we've processed over I think, the last year and a half or so as we've looked at potential tax increment financing in our growth center. So what our plan is for tonight with our team here is to share what we've learned to date with the board and the public, discuss tax increment financing as a potential tool for our growth center area and potential alternatives, discuss some potential next steps. This is not a roadmap to what comes next. It's a good time to check in with the board as the elected officials, share what we've learned and where we continue to work. So just to kind of reset things with the scope and need, of this. Actually, I want to introduce our team here first. Joining me, Planning Director Matt Belanger, Public Works Director Bruce Orr, we have Brian Pine from White and Burke, and we have Jason Booth from Aldrich and Elliott, our wastewater engineering.
This is really the Public Works Director, just so y'all know.
And Christine, our Assistant Director, is here as well. So as we've shared with the board, and Matt will recap some of this too, the Growth Center is one of our main drivers of future grand list growth in town and thinking about what that looks like moving forward for the community. As part of the form-based code, there was a vision plan adopted by the Select Board a few years ago to complement that, to think of what could be in our Growth Center. The desired growth pattern of that vision plan requires new public infrastructure to support it. This includes the housing goals that's set regionally and by the state, green spaces, regional transportation goals, and service delivery demand and capacity is certainly part of the conversation as we progress this moving forward. So what we did is the Select Board allocated ARPA funds to study the feasibility of tax increment financing in TAF corners, and we'll recap what that is for everybody as a refresher in a few minutes. Consultants from White and Burke were retained to assist us with that work. Stephanie, before Brian, he came on to assist us. We looked at potential district boundary and project list, and there were multiple discussions for the model led by our planning team to take a really interesting look at that and come up with some ways to really, the big thing of this was trying to predict future potential wastewater flows based on development pattern, and that's when we really got into wastewater modeling as part of all this as well. We determined that capacity was critical for this, and I came to the board to ask for some additional funding to fund that wastewater analysis study. We were planning to do this in a couple years anyway. It was, I think, about 10 years or so we wanted to do one of these, and this was a good time to look at that as part of this model to start some of that work. So one thing we'll be thinking about is the variable of time as critical to this discussion. This investment in public infrastructure, it can truncate the system demands for wastewater timelines. And you'll see in the wastewater study, it illustrates how that time variable can affect future capital planning, whether it's publicly or privately funded, with the assets becoming public after if they're privately funded. And to realize this vision for TAF corners.
I'm sorry, could you say, Eric, I don't know why I got stuck on the first bullet. What are you saying there? Public infrastructure investment can truncate wastewater system?
Yeah, I should probably said it simpler. It's like the demand can increase quicker than you modeled it before.
Okay, then I'm being confused by truncate.
Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah.
It can kind of accelerate.
Accelerate the timelines. Okay, yeah.
That's a better way to say it.
Okay.
And as we're looking at this potential vision moving forward to get to some reality of that, it's going to take, we've talked about before, dedicated resources and creative approaches in thinking about this, especially through concepts like public-private partnerships for infrastructure investment.
Is there a reason or could you articulate for me, the reason why of all the infrastructure issues like roads and electricity and everything else, schools and everything else you chose, just really seems like this is the one you focused on?
For wastewater and grid streets?
Yeah.
Yeah, what started with this was, as we'll look at Trader Lane, kind of that street we've talked about for quite a long time to create that connection as kind of a first grid street in TAF corners. Then as we thought about potential increment financing for Trader Lane to be possible, it got us to thinking broadly about that area developing and what demands would be placed on the wastewater system. And that became a real place for us to put a lot of attention into at this point in the process to understand that critical piece of public infrastructure.
Okay, so just kind of raised to the top is probably the most restricted.
Yeah.
Okay.
So overall, that critical question we were setting out to answer was, does a TIF district in the growth center make sense at this time? Is it viable? We'll kind of walk through where we got to that question through this process. So I'll turn it over to Brian now. I've got a couple of slides just kind of resetting. TIF in Vermont, what is tax increment financing in Vermont? What does it do? So, how's it do, Brian?
Thanks, Eric.
Tell me when you want me to move any of these slides.
Sure.
Together.
It's a little hard to do this with the staff member of the agency that runs. So it's
No pressure.
It's like having your teacher sitting down. You asked a great question, I think, just a minute ago. I want to touch on that, which is why focus on wastewater of all the pieces of infrastructure. And I'm not an engineer and I don't even pretend to be one, but that is probably the Gordian knot, if you will, of development, because you can go out in a year and spend some money on your roads or your sidewalks or other things, but wastewater, you really have to think and plan ahead for future growth and capacity. And so it's, assuming our, regional water district covers the supply of water, you all are going to be constrained by capacity to handle people send water to the treatment plant. So that's really why it's not the most important one of those infrastructure resources that you want to focus on. So, yeah. This is a slide which I've inherited from my colleagues, and I'll use it because it's what they've used. The concept behind tax increment financing is it's actually pretty simple, but it gets complicated once you get into the details. But the concept is basically, rather than take the cost of pipes and pumps and everything necessary for new development to happen and put that cost on the taxpayers who are already here, already paying taxes, the notion is the new tax revenue, at least a portion of the new tax revenue from new development, will be harnessed, will be retained, and that's used to pay the financing, the debt service, the payments on a loan, basically, or bond, in case of municipal financing. So this starts at the top with municipal bond, and municipal bonding is the tool that is used for tax increment financing. It is a little different from CHIP, which we'll talk about briefly. We'll touch on CHIP a little bit. But I just want to note that it's to build the infrastructure, you then to enable a private sector development at the bottom of this wheel, if you will, followed by new incremental property tax growth, and that new tax increment, we call it increment, is used to service that bond at the top of the cycle here. What's really important, the distinction in Vermont, unlike other jurisdictions, tax increment financing is not the if you build it, they will come. It's not that. It's not as if you can build the infrastructure hoping that you'll get development. You really have to have identified development that needs the infrastructure to be able to show that there's a demand from the marketplace for new development, but for the investment of public funds in the infrastructure, the development would not happen. That's essentially a really important piece to keep in mind. So a municipality might like the idea of upgrading its infrastructure. Let's use TIF and let's put a new infrastructure and let's hope something comes. It doesn't work that way. Vermont does not allow that. It's completely not. It's done that way in other states, and that's why the tool is not the most popular tool in other states. And our state auditor has chosen to focus on that, sort of those angles of it, which is, oh, this development would have happened this way, and that I think there's plenty of evidence that that's not the case. Luckily, our state government and the agency that it's like board member works for embraces the notion that some level of public investment is what's really needed. I would just say historically, the public always invested in public infrastructure to enable neighborhoods to be created. It's only in the last several decades where we said to developers, you can build everything here needed to make your development happen. That's kind of the more recent. It's an exception to the rule. It used to be that all public infrastructure was financed through the taxpayer. This tool is really a way to just grapple with the fact that there's plenty of demands on our tax dollars for education, for police and fire, for all the other things that local government does. And rather than add one more burden that could be used to, or could be viewed as a way to stop development or halt development, TIF is really there to enable housing and economic development to go forward without being constrained by local annual tax dollars. That's really good. So this is somewhat readable, I think, and it's we use this term original taxable value. It's one of the most important terms in the whole concept of TIF. And that isn't the most correct graphic there. The graph on the left is supposed to be the municipal portion. If I see the colors correctly, I have someplace closer. Is it blue? Municipal blue? I think municipal's blue. The green is the education fund. And so, it suggests that every tax dollar, half of it goes to education and half to municipal. That's usually not the case in Vermont. It's usually more like 70-30 or 65-35, something like that. But just keep in mind that that original taxable value just stays the same. So it's sort of frozen in time at OTV, we like to say, but that's the number that we use, from which that's the baseline to measure growth in the TIF district. So you've created a district, which is a number of properties you've identified as a municipality that are, that fit within your local plan, and you want to focus investment and development there, and you essentially apply for the creation of that district. You get local approval and you apply to Pepsi for that creation of that district. That's the mechanics of how this works. Once you've created the district, the orange portion there is 85% of your municipal revenue, and 70% of the state education dollars are retained. And when we say retained, it just means rather than sending it to the entities, the departments, state government, you hold on to it as a municipality. It's a segregated fund, and you use it to service the bond that you issued in order to build the infrastructure. So that's how you repay it. However, there's that little bit at the top. The green is a little bigger than the blue at the top of that middle bar. That's because you're getting, you're sending 30% of your education fund increment to the education fund, and you're getting 15% of that increment for municipal services. And the windfall arrives 20 years later, if it all works out, and it should, because it has worked out elsewhere in other districts, that you have taxing authorities now are getting this new increase in revenue flows to both the local government for municipal services and to the education fund. So that's a crash course, I think, in TIF. Next. And our next slide, I think, is going to show us. Okay. Yeah. Oh yeah, there's the list chart. This is one that we have to use. It's a little more complicated. It essentially tells you what the other side said already, but it just puts it in a little more granular detail as to how this mechanism works. You've got your baseline, your original taxable value. You've got the growth happening with new development that's occurring, and again, you're capturing 70% of that from the education fund. The municipal portion is, it could get up to 100. It's not that common or that popular to go up to 100, but it has been done. And if it's necessary to meet your debt service obligations, you might have to go up to 100 for a while. Then you can work with Pepsi and do a change, and you do a change to lower that amount of retention. So you might start at 100 to get the project going and to get your financing underway and to ensure that the increment is sufficient to make your debt payments.
I was just going to ask that, maybe that's the question. So while construction's going on, how do you know what the eventual value is going to be?
Great question. I wish there was an assessor in the room. Assessors need to tell us what it's going to be worth. And they do that. It takes some time as part of the process of figuring that out. But what we have, most TIF districts have a, in the form of a development agreement that's a binding, legally binding agreement. The developer's obligated to essentially complete a project that will generate sufficient tax revenue to service the debt. And if they don't, they're responsible for covering the difference.
Okay. And what about like
That's how we protect the local taxpayer.
what happens in the couple of years when you're building?
Oh, I'm sorry. While you're building, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I like the second answer too.
Okay. So while you're building, you're allowed to use, the financing is allowed to be structured in such a way that you are essentially meeting your payment obligations through the borrowed funds.
For 2 years.
For 2 years. For CHIP it's 4, but for TIF it's 2. And so that gives you an incentive to kind of get your project done.
Oh,
right?
good.
The municipality has, there's an agreement, there's some teeth in it. I think the municipality needs to have real trust in their developer who's doing the development, that they're taking this obligation seriously. But in the end, we haven't had, nobody's had to call that, that part of the agreement in as far as collecting on a developer who didn't achieve the development and the new tax revenue. So it doesn't happen. And it's not a new tool, the first TIF district. I was actually involved in because I worked for the city of Burlington. It was in 1996. So we've got 30 years of TIF in Vermont. I think we've covered it in that chart.
Yeah.
Yeah. This would be Matt, I think, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so now I'll toss it to Matt and we're going to talk about the area we looked at and kind of revisit some of the grand list elements and the area in the vision plan.
Yeah, so my part of the presentation sort of starts with backing out a little bit. Why are we doing this? Why are we looking at accelerating the construction of infrastructure or accelerating or even encouraging development in Williston and specifically in Taft Corners? I'm going to go over a couple things you've seen before, and I'll end this part talking a little bit about how we started to try to come up with some estimates of what we thought the potential of the growth center was and what likely demand it might create on the wastewater system as we saw that build out. So I probably won't read everything on the slide. That's probably relieving to some of you. But you know, the growth center, we've had 2 decades of change. Most recently, there's another 2 to 3 decades of change that came before that. But you know, in the last 20 years, we've seen the build out of Finney Crossing and other large projects there. A lot of that just kind of on its own. Not a lot of infrastructure built by the town. Some impact fee relief granted by the town for some pieces of public infrastructure. Ultimately, Zephyr Road became a credit to the impact fee liability for the Finney Crossing project. But really 20 years of change, but following the pattern that Williston's experienced since there was any kind of significant development in Williston, which is, okay, you're a developer, you want to come do something in Williston, here's our zoning, here's our list of requirements, here's what you're going to need to do to obtain a permit. And so why are we talking about investing in infrastructure or spending money or even, you know, staff time on thinking about the vision for Taft Corners? Well, it's in really small font on the slide, but the era of easy greenfield growth is ending all over Williston. Parent parcels are smaller. It's looking more like infill development, and there are some significant infrastructure needs in terms of the build out of the grid streets in Taft Corners to make some of the land that's available useful for the kind of development the town would see happening in that area in its vision. We also have housing needs statewide, regionally, here in Williston that we're trying to achieve. And we have some economic reasons to sort of think about the diversity and balance and continued health of the town's grand list and how that impacts Williston taxpayers in terms of their property tax. So you've seen these colors and these kind of charts before, looking at that history of the grand list back when we talked about this in 2024. It's a little hard to see, but this little yellow sliver is that apartment commercial category coming into Williston over the last 20 years, about $95 million worth of new grand list value there. And you see also the green section down here, the commercial, going down between 2016 and 2024. And if you think about this top of the chart, the top of the orange section of the chart, which is the residential, the bulk of where your property tax revenue comes from in Williston, well, in this chart it goes up and down. But what this represents proportionally is the makeup of your grand list that has to come up with whatever you're asking of that grand list to fund the town. So how much the town needs from this balance of properties didn't go up and down, it went up. And I had a different version of the chart that showed that. But the important part is diversifying the grand list, having things like density in Taft Corners and especially the apartment commercial category has served as a bit of a stabilizing force where otherwise the town may have had to ask property owners, homeowners for more of that share of the revenue. So that's why we're thinking about it. There's the flat line version. So just total proportion, you know, if you imagine the top of that orange color bar representing 100% of what the town needs out of property tax, that's how that looks. And you know, there's some risk in that when you start to see commercial flat to declining, and we've seen some specific examples of that, the sale price of Maple Tree Place versus its assessed value, et cetera. The rise of online shopping and the challenge of maintaining that big box shopping format that Williston is so famous for, you know, 20 years after it was all built and as the world's just shifting under our feet. So another reason to think about that. And so you know, most of you have been around for or aware of all of our planning work in Taft Corners and the form-based code and everything we've thought about that might happen there. And we sort of find ourselves at this crossroads between business as usual in Taft Corners or working to achieve the vision. And these are just some basic notes about that. Some of this I've already talked about, you know, health of the grand list, financing of infrastructure. Do you just say to the developer, look, here's our rules. You want to build here. Here's the kind of street we want you to build. If it makes sense to you, go for it. And if it doesn't, nothing gets built, and we're okay with that. Whereas the Taft Corners vision probably requires a greater public-private partnership. Probably under a business as usual scenario, we don't achieve anything close to the housing targets that the state has set out for us. We probably achieve somewhere between a half to 2/3 of that target. Density is a challenge. The growth center as a whole is about 800 acres. And the Planning Commission, when they looked at the form-based code, were quite concerned that we are allowing this density, but we may just get sort of unconnected pockets of it across that 800-acre landscape, because it's a lot of land. And one way to bring some focus to that is to invest in the infrastructure. And, oh, hey, here's a street that unlocks some subset of those 800 acres and leads to a concentration in the development of a center within a center, which is a little bit of what Trader Lane is about. Also thinking about greater involvement under the Taft Corners vision, helping us plan better for service demand, and hopefully change the story a little bit about the changing face of retail, that you may get some smaller, more intensive, higher value commercial coming in as that density happens. I don't know if anybody saw the headline today, in my backyard, City Center, South Burlington, Lunig's will be opening a second restaurant. I'll be walking there for steak frite after a planning commission meeting before you know it. At least that's the vision. So bringing in some of those more experiential things that are starting to carry the commercial and retail portfolio rather than a big store full of stuff that you can also buy on Amazon. So then, talk a little bit about how we got where we got in terms of looking at our wastewater needs and looking at how this relates to studying TIF as a funding tool. There's a couple of maps of the growth center in here that lay out the grid streets in oranges and yellows, and I'm going to get to one of those in a second that shows how we tried to predict some of our needs as related to potential growth. This slide is not very exciting because it looks like a shot of a really big spreadsheet. And what every line on that spreadsheet is a place in the growth center where we thought a significant building could be built under the form-based code without demolishing an existing building. Some of these lines represent buildings in parking lots, but most of them represent buildings on greenfield sites, roughly the size of a mid-sized Cottonwood Crossing or Finney Crossing apartment building. So we're talking that 180-foot long by 70-foot deep by 3 to 4 story building with, in this case, we created what we call the average form-based code building with a half commercial ground story, 36 apartments inside. So that's what we based both some of our predictions about wastewater treatment demand and some of our predictions about incremental value that could be added on doing that. So coming up with roughly what's the kind of building we're seeing in the growth center. So we literally averaged the new buildings in Cottonwood and Finney that are 3 and more stories and came up with this number. And we're trying to answer that question, can a tax increment finance district be used to fund the construction of Trader Lane and other needed infrastructure, meaning wastewater, to support the private development on Trader Lane? That's the question we arrived at. And we needed to look at likely wastewater demand, likely infrastructure costs, and likely increment that we could raise.
Is the Trader Lane the one you like the best, or are there other possible blocks of property that we could consider, or is that clearly the one?
Let me talk a little bit about that. So, Eric, if you want to go to the next slide. I just forgot that I'm not running the show. That's good. So I talked a little bit about these maps, and it's still going to be hard to see on this, but we looked at Trader Lane for a couple of reasons. One is long before the Taft Corners vision plan and long before the form-based code, and even before the cancellation of the circumferential highway, the town has wanted to build something like Trader Lane in Taft Corners. It goes back to the mid-90s, and this plan that was called the Taft Corners Target Plan, which had nothing to do with the retail store. It literally meant creating a bullseye of concentric streets around the Taft Corners intersection to allow for better traffic flow and to open up land use. So Trader Lane predates a lot of this visioning work. So that's one reason to look at it. The other is when we look at roughly the 4 quadrants of Taft Corners, Blair Park is more built out, has some large state ownership with the Vermont State University there, and seems unlikely that significant change will happen there, although there could be some infill. Moving clockwise to the, Hamlet, Finney Crossing, northeast quadrant, again, mostly built out with some small opportunities for infill. Almost any of the infill potential in that quadrant is on existing streets. So there's not as much public infrastructure to think about building. We go to the southwest, there's definitely some potential there. The remainder of Cottonwood Crossing, the land that surrounds it, and a little bit of infill to the south of Maple Tree Place. Some of the things we've done in the CHIP slideshows before have talked about that.
The police barracks, I was kind of
Police
surprised it
barracks.
wasn't really called out. So.
Much longer runs of streets to build to get in there, and also some of that land is a little less challenged, although it has its challenges, than Trader Lane, so a little bit flatter, less grade to continue to contend with. And so that takes us to where we come back and we focus on Trader Lane. A little more challenging environment, a whole lot of greenfield land, that needs a street from Marshall Ave to Route 2 to connect. Also a street project where we have a commitment for some of the funding from the state of Vermont related to the Route 2 intersection. So those are some reasons. Also a landowner that's been interested in working with us with J.L. Davis Realty on conceptualizing the street. So just a couple of reasons. And so I think I covered the first 2 bullets, quadrants and project narrowing. And the blue represents the parcels where we think something could happen because Trader Lane is constructed. So we focused in, and you can't see it very well on this either. And I can zoom into a map like this later if I want to talk about it. But what we did was we took the existing parcels and we had that average Taft Corners building. 3.5 stories, half a commercial ground floor, 30 apartments, mix of 1 and 2 bedrooms. And we created that as a footprint at 70 by 180 feet. And then we created a half-size one at 70 by 90 feet. And we just looked for anywhere physically we could fit that building with the long edge facing the street. That's how we placed these. We then rated them based on the likelihood that we thought they might happen. So the one in the Hannaford parking lot gets a highly unlikely rating right now, and the one on, a piece of green land that would front on New Trader Lane gets a highly likely. So we rated them, like 1 to 4, something like that. Then we took the ones that we thought were most likely to build, and we counted them. And so when we counted them, we came up with a wastewater number. Again, based on what we're seeing for actual billing and flows coming out of the existing big buildings in Taft Corners. We also checked that number against the environmental protection rules and Williston's own rules about wastewater to make sure we weren't way off, and we weren't. So our prediction seemed fairly sound. And so we did that for the whole growth center. We started with a really big number that you're going to see in the A&E report, almost 400,000 gallons per day additional capacity that would be needed. So if you put a building everywhere there's not a building right now in the growth center, and they're all at least 3 stories tall, and they all have lots of apartments and some commercial in them, you're looking at about 400,000 gallons per day. And we own about 250,000 gallons per day at the plant that we're not using right now, so not enough. If you go into this quadrant that surrounds Trader Lane and do a full workup on that, we cut that about in half. We're coming about 199,000. And so that's the number, 197, it might say in the report, something like that. That's the number we're going to start talking about in the sewer report, and all of the various system components that from now until that additional 199,000 comes online need to be upgraded, and when and how much we think they'll cost. The other thing we did is we looked at grand list value for apartments and for commercial space. And so we came up with a typical average value for all of those little rectangles and squares that we parked on the map to look at what that potential was. And there's lots of potential for value here, but not a project that looks like that proposed here right now. And we can talk about that a little further along. But I wanted to just kind of go over that we did a physical mapping exercise to try to come up with a really fair estimate of the development potential of the area if you do something like build Trader Lane.
So you said your model was retail on the first floor and 3 stories of apartments?
Yeah, we only counted, it's like half of the first floor would be retail or commercial, because what really happens is we have some buildings that are commercial throughout. We have some buildings that are commercial on the ground story, like Cottonwood. And then we have some buildings that are completely residential, like some of the other buildings. So we looked at it and said, on average, if we're putting a building on the ground, we should not assume any more than half of its footprint is commercial space.
Okay, and then 3 stories of apartments?
3 to 3.5. It's probably like 3.2.
Probably those half stories,
Yeah.
probably can get the same rent for them.
Well, it's for those 2.7 people in a household.
Good point.
They need the half story because they're taller. So yeah, just as a way of trying to come up with a generic building and distribute those across the map. So that, I think, is, Eric, where I leave off, and you roll into talking about the infrastructure.
So that kind of sets how we looked at this. So then we need to figure out, okay, what are the projects we would need to do and how much would those potentially cost for that side of the equation? Then we'll go back to the development side of it. So turn it to,
I think Jason and I can leave. I think Matt covered it all.
I guess we'll talk about the pipes and the roads now.
Well, I got 36 pages of sewage.
Yeah.
You got to have something to talk about.
So, it had on here for me to talk about Trader Lane, but Matt's covered that, how long it's been around. When I came, there was appraisals done for all the property there in 2009, because that's how close everybody thought we were to building Trader Lane. Obviously, those are no good anymore. The good news is it's mostly still the same property owner, and he's on board with most of this stuff. But anyway, Jason is here to really get into the upgrades that we'll need to do. But before we even get into that, we had Jason take a look at this, the growth center planning for evaluation. But I wanted to point out that we had a sewer capacity analysis done in 2017, and we're going to be asking for another one in 2027. So every 10 years, we ask to have that done to see what these, to build our capital plan for future outlays. And what Jason did was come up, he did most of that 2027 planning, basically. Now, I'm already asking to upgrade it, with the rest of the town being looked at. But I also want you to keep in mind, some of the numbers you're gonna hear are pretty scary, but it's not as dire as some of it sounds. Just as an example, one of the things you're gonna hear is where we're at pump station capacity-wise. That's with a peaking factor put on. I'm not taking it away from Jason, but that's why those numbers look so high. And just as an example, 2.5 weeks ago, we sent 1 million gallons across the river. So we can do it. Is it good? No, it's not good. It's taxing the system, obviously. And what it tells me is that a lot of our system is built deep enough, because a lot of that's got to be backing up in our system somewhere. And we're not getting complaints, we're not having overflows in people's homes. bad enough if we had them out in the ground. But, so anyway, with that, basically let Jason run through. Eric wanted me to do a real quick, dirty, simple, what the system consists of. Gravity lines come out of your house, go to the gravity lines. Most of those gravity lines then have to go to a pump station and then get pumped uphill or over to a point where they can go back to gravity to get to our major pump station at River Cove. We own 10 major pump stations, and there's 12 to 13 private stations on the system. With this build out of Trader Lane, there is the possibility, depending upon which way we split that sewer to go, that we can end up owning another pump station. So, all right, Jason?
Okay. So our report focused on the evaluation of the wastewater impacts on this proposed conceptual TIF district. And as Matt pointed out, there's a boundary that was created with quadrants. So we kind of looked at two scenarios. The first scenario was a full build-out scenario, looking at the max development in each of the four quadrants was about 377,000 gallons per day that would have been added to the collection system. On the partial build-out, we looked at just Trader Lane, 198,000 gallons per day for additional development, additional capacity that would be added into the collection system. In addition, and if you took a look at the report, there's a whole host of tables in there that are super exciting. So they look at a couple of different things on the different scenarios for phased build-out, but one of the important things that there's a table in both the pump station section and the collection system section that compares a build-out over time of each scenario. So the full build-out scenario over the 20-year design period from 2025 to 2045 in 5-year increments, and looks at the capacity impacts over that duration.
And 20 years is a normal lifespan.
Normal design cycles, yeah. So those tables are important to look at when you're looking at this time increment of the development and what those impacts do over time, and helps you identify where in that time frame of development you really need to pull the trigger on executing these projects that have been identified. So the infrastructure that we evaluated was the wastewater collection infrastructure that serves the conceptual Trader Lane TIF district. So that's within these quadrants. Within the quadrants, the conceptual Trader Lane TIF district, the Blair Park pump station exists, and the Taft Farm pump station exists that are directly within that in that area. Additionally, with the addition of flow in that area, what happens is you impact the infrastructure that's immediately downstream of all of that development. So we looked at the collection system that this development area contributes to downstream. That includes the Industrial Avenue pump station and the River Cove pump station. So this is a little bit hard to see. If you don't mind, I'm going to get up here. So this is sort of the general area where the conceptual district is. You can see the Blair Park and the Taft Farms pump station, and then up to the north, Essex Junction is up here, South Burlington is over here. We have Industrial Ave pump station and River Cove pump station. And generally what happens is on the north-south corridor on Route 2A is a major trunk line, arterial trunk line for the collection system, and a portion on Route 2 from Taft Corners going out towards the village center is also another arterial trunk line. They tie together. Those were evaluated as part of the system. Gravity flows to the north, and near the rehab gym just south of O'Brien Court, the gravity sewer cuts cross lots and runs down to Lamplight Acres. From Lamplight, it goes gravity north Brown Isle Road toward the Industrial Ave pump station. It's pumped from the industrial lab pump station over to Pamela Court, and then cross lots again behind Horseshoe Lane over to River Cove Road, and then to the River Cove pump station, and then to the treatment plant. So just a general overview of, those are sort of the areas we looked at within this evaluation. This is a fun slide for people who like schematics.
I didn't see this in there.
Oh, I like this one.
Surprise.
Great, no, I got it. It's like
We
this.
created a schematic for the Williston wastewater collection system. Again, don't mind if I get up here. But really what we're looking at is the Path Farms pump station pumps into the system, Blair Park pumps into the system and flows down to Industrial Lab, to River Cove, and then over to the Essex Junction pump station. Or sorry, Essex Junction wastewater.
Mike Isham is really disappointed he's not on this board. Love this stuff.
Can I ask a question? Just-
Yeah.
So what would the actual defined TIF district be? Would it be the southwest quadrant, or would it be all 4 quadrants?
It would be the southwest quadrant,
Okay.
assuming that Trader Lane is the project.
Okay.
Plus the wastewater necessary to serve
Yeah.
the development Trader Lane would trigger.
That's what I thought, but
Yeah.
I just was confused by it.
Good question.
Yeah.
You start
The
digging.
Taft Farms pump station was looked at, and that's the impacts to the neighborhood.
Okay,
Because it's all going in the southeast corner.
sure.
Even in full build out, the impacts to the Taft Farms pump station were not consequential. Same with the Blair Park pump station, that had some recent upgrades, and that wasn't impacted as significantly as some of the other proceeds. So, report conclusions, so focusing first on the gravity sewer collection system, much of the gravity sewer system that serves the conceptual TIF district that would be directly impacted by flows is adequate over the next 20-year period. So the flows were not significantly impacted that would provide upgrades within that specific area. Most of the gravity sewer system impacts are largely downstream of this conceptual TIF district. And again, keep in mind this is based on the estimated flows. And these things can always change. So the reason that it impacts downstream is you already have flow from the village. You have flows from the other areas that are contributing. And this additional flow really hits that downstream area hard. At full build-out projections, replacements should be considered within the next 5 to 10 years. And then at this partial projection, replacements were identified within 10 to 20 years. So that's on that timeline. Again, if you go back to that table, that allocates the build-out over the 20-year design life, you can see that it's pushed further out, which makes sense. I mean, that tracks. So the critical gravity sewer segments that we identified, and again, this is applicable to both full build-out and partial build-out, but Horseshoe Lane, which is a short section of gravity sewer, it's actually cross lots, it's cross-country, it's in the woods between Horseshoe Lane and River Cove Road on a gravity section. At full build-out replacement, that would be required within the next 5 years. At partial build-out, we're looking at maybe the next 10 years. Smaller dollars than some of the others, around $200,000 for that replacement, and those are today's dollars. And just to step back a little bit, when we look at some of the gravity sewer segments, it's really driven by existing pipe size, existing slope on the gravity sewer. So you could have, and you'll see when you get into some of these reaches, if you were to look at some of the mapping, we have similar size diameter pipes, but there's a lot of areas that have some flat slopes, and that really decreases the capacity of the sewer. So that's particularly why in this section, we only have a short reach of this overall sewer, this cross-country sewer, that needs to be replaced because it happens to be a very flat section, which decreases its capacity. Lamplight Lane to Route 2A is about 2,200 linear feet. It's currently between 60 and 70% capacity. I'll talk a little bit more about capacity in a minute when we get to the pump stations. I think it'll be more applicable. At full build-out replacement, this is required within the next 10 years. partial build-out, that replacement is pushed towards the end of the design period we looked at, so closer to 2045. Again, it depends on actual speed of build-out and flows that are realized. Today's dollars, it's about $1.2 million for that replacement. Again, that's all cross-country from 2A down to Lamplight. And then the other section is 2A from O'Brien Court to the intersection with Route 2. It's about 1,900 linear feet, currently at 50% capacity. The reason this is identified as a stretch is there are segments within that stretch that are constrained or projected to be constrained. And you know, from a dollars and cents thing, if you're going to get in and some of these sections, you've got maybe a 300-foot section that needs to be replaced, and then you've got a 200-foot section that needs to be replaced, and then the next 300-foot section that needs to be replaced. It's more economical to just do the stretch and replace all of it, so that you don't have a weird segment in the middle that could become a future issue. So that's partially why this is incorporated here. Similar to the Lamplight cross-country section, at full build-out, this replacement is pushed out to 2045. This is actually less of a concern than the other two. And we'll see that when we look at the priorities a little later on. A little bit more expensive. Part of that is driven by its location. It's right on the edge of the road, high travel, high traffic capacity area, difficult construction. So this map here, you can actually see, it's hard to see here, but there's a darker, thicker outline here. That's the overall conceptual district. And you can see this red here is the section on 2A all the way through Lamplight, the cross-country behind Lamplight, and then a small section over by Horseshoe Drive, Horseshoe Lane.
So it's not just the southwest quadrant? It's all.
So that's the whole growth center,
Growth center,
the whole thing.
but not the whole district? Or the
No,
whole
that's-
district?
That's the entire TIF, the full build-out TIF district, correct?
Well, so that's the whole Taft Corners Growth Center.
Yeah.
The form-based code district lives inside that. And then what we were looking at for TIF with Trader Lane is then just that one quadrant.
Okay.
So this, inside that black boundary is where we're getting that, what'd you say, 344, 377?
Yes.
So 377,000 gallons per day at full build out of everything inside the heavy dark line.
The whole growth center?
Yeah.
Yeah, so just to be clear, this is the whole growth center. Everything in this growth center, partial build-out or full build-out, goes this way.
Yeah,
Like-
yeah.
Slide.
So pump stations. River Cove Pump Station, this is your primary pump station for the town of Williston. We're talking now about very critical infrastructure for the town of Williston. This pump station accepts 100% of the flow from the town of Williston and pumps that flow over to the Essence Junction wastewater treatment facility. Currently, this pump station is at 100% capacity. So I just want to talk a little bit about what that capacity, what that means, what that concept means. So capacity is developed by utilizing a peaking factor. So what we do is, and what we did for this particular study, and we would do for every study which is standard, is you look at a range of about 3 years of flows for each of the pump stations. So for River Cove, we looked at 22 through 25 for flows. And then we tabulate those and we develop average daily flows for the pump station. Those average daily flows are then, there's a peaking factor that's applied to those. And that's your max capacity. That's a gauge. That's the point at which you are, it's like your peak, your instantaneous flow. That's your upper limit of that station, or of what that flow can produce. Then we take that peaking, that capacity that we've calculated, and we compare that to the output, for in this particular case, the output of the pump station. So each pump at River Cove can produce 1,500 gallons a minute. So we take that average daily flow with a peaking factor applied, and we compare that to the maximum capacity that an individual pump can do. And that's how we calculate this capacity that you're seeing. So right now, based on one pump operational at the River Cove pump station, with a peaking factor applied, you're at 100% capacity. Average daily flows at River Cove are between 700 and 850,000 gallons a day, somewhere in that range, depends up and down. I know that you've seen flows there that have exceeded 1 million gallons, maybe close to 2 million gallons in instantaneous flows.
No, I've never seen over 1 million.
No, we have a couple over, I think, anyway.
Yeah.
1 million, close to 1 million. So your flows get up, and those are instantaneous flows. Those aren't sustained flows. So when you talk about 100% capacity, or even an instantaneous flow, the pump station's not pumping at 100% capacity today, or even right now. At 800,000 gallons a minute, 800,000 gallons a day on an average, that pump station is at 40% capacity based on the maximum output of the pumps. So this is a comparison number. This is an industry standard where you apply a peaking factor. Typically it's 2.5 to 3 is your peaking factor that you use. And it's a comparative tool to utilize when you need to start making decisions about your infrastructure and what's driving your capacity within your system. It's also an indicator of whether you have high flows that are off the charts. Maybe you have infiltration. Maybe you have II within your system that are exceeding what would be the norm. So that's the capacity aspect of
I just
this.
have a question, I lost you somewhere. So 700 to 800 is the average, so wouldn't 3 times that be over 2 million gallons?
Yes, we used a peaking factor of 2.5, I think, Bruce, for this.
2.5.
2.5 is.
So 21,
Yeah, it's 2.1 is the peaking factor. This is the peaking, the average daily flow with the peaking factor applied.
and what's the output capacity when you count up all those pumps on the other side?
River Cove?
Yeah,
1,500 gallons a minute per pump,
So it's 2,160 million gallons per day.
per day.
I've lost the zeros again. Is that the same amount as 3 times the,
It's very close.
Very close,
So
okay.
currently right now, it's about 98%.
okay.
98%, at capacity is 98%, not 100, but it's very, very close.
Okay, so the average, the 700 or 800 is, then if you multiply that times 2.5, that's how you get to the peaking factor, which
Correct.
is equal right now to basically what it can actually handle.
Correct.
Okay.
To the pumping capacity.
See, McHugh, I didn't need to read the whole thing. I could just ask my questions.
That's correct.
Okay.
So,
I want to just real quick.
yeah, go ahead.
So the flows that Jason used from 22 to 25, we changed the way we're looking at flows at the plant, at the River Cove now. From 22 to, I don't know, halfway through 24 probably, it was all done by a weir and a manual read, for lack of a better term. And now it's all done by infrared or radar. So we feel like we're getting much more accurate numbers. And with those, and that's why I said just a couple weeks ago, we had the big rainstorm. If we get this gusher tonight, we may see by Thursday, we may see 1 million gallons again. Because we do have obviously inflow and infiltration. But just to give you some numbers real quick, in April, the average gallons per day was 691,000. March was 664,000. May was 662,000. So the way that skews those numbers to the 7 and the 800 is if we get too many of those million-gallon flows, obviously, changes that average. We haven't been seeing that a lot lately, but we still do see it. Like I said, we just saw it like 2 weeks ago. I actually went on the site today to pull out what day it actually was, and of course, the site was crashed. So, so, you know, that's why I said before we started here, we're gonna hear some pretty scary numbers. But you know, the system as it stands today, we're not gonna fall apart tomorrow. And a lot of this stuff from that 2017 study, and Jason's probably not even there yet, we developed a capital improvement program, and some of these projects are already in the works.
Just a quick question. If it's 7 to 8 is the average, what's like a normal fluctuation during a day? Like you said, 1 million's kind of like the biggest you've ever seen, so is it just another 100, you know, for like,
Well, it depends on whether it rains or not.
but if it doesn't rain?
What, flows were pretty good last year during the drought.
Yeah, right, so I'm seeing in Industrial Avenue, 590,000 gallons per day, and in Canada, we're seeing 650,000 gallons a day.
So the fluctuation during the day isn't really the problem, it's the
We don't really.
stormwater
Our
issues.
numbers are based on, unless we want to watch the pumps, our numbers are based on the whole day.
On the average, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
One thing that's useful with looking at this capacity number, as a rule of thumb, and if you get in to start looking at environmental protection rules for the state of Vermont and drinking water supply rules, 80% capacity with a peaking factor triggers the beginning of an evaluation. 90% of capacity triggers implementation. So just to keep that in mind, that's something that is as a standard for the environmental protection rules and the water supply rule. That's how they use triggers to start to gauge or to assist municipalities in beginning planning and beginning implementation for upgrade projects.
Because we've already passed that number.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
But we had it in 2017 when the report was done.
Uh-oh.
Wasn't projected to
Correct.
Really?
2017.
Oh, wow.
Well, and to that point, you know, this River Cove pump station and the Industrial Ave pump station were both upgraded in 2012, 2013. At the time, there were 2 design points for each pump station. 900 gallons a minute was the low, the average design capacity. 1,500 gallons a minute was the max design capacity in this instantaneous peak flow condition. Those pump stations both run at 1,500 gallons a minute. Period. So there's changes to the system that are evident through operation as well as, you know, looking at some of the numbers. One of the other things at the River Cove pump station that is critical is the force main that goes from the River Cove pump station under the river over to the Essex Junction wastewater treatment facility. Currently, that pump station is that force main is a 10-inch diameter force main. Under current pumping conditions at 1,500 gallons a minute, that pump station is becoming constrained. And what that means is, it's, you know, when you pull through a straw, the harder you pull, you know, you get to a point where you can't pull anymore. It's kind of that same concept. So your velocities in the force main are getting very, very high, which at a point in time where they get too high, you're going to impact the ability for the pump to move water. So currently at 1,500 gallons a minute, that force main is constrained. So that's probably one of the more critical elements right now, even just as a baseline for the system. Adding additional flow, obviously you've got to contend with that, and that force main becomes pretty critical. So 2 things that came out of this evaluation: upgrades for the River Cove pump station, upgrading the pumps, and that's a picture right there on the right-hand side, looking down at the 2 pumps that are in the River Cove pump station way down deep in the dry pit, and then the force main cost. Pump station upgrades, we're looking at potentially $800,000 for the pump station upgrades, and that's larger pumps. And this is, again, there's some incremental steps that can be taken. And part of this, Bruce referenced a little bit, going back to 2017, there was a recommendation to begin looking at these pumps and upgrading these pumps. And that's underway right now. Part of the challenge is we can't go where we need to go with the pump upgrades because we have the force main constraints. So if we add more capacity on the pumps, that's going to cause problems with the force main. So right now, we're looking at an incremental upgrade to the pumps. And that's going to put the pump capacity up to 1,800 gallons a minute, buys you a little bit of capacity, buys you a little bit of time. It does put the pumps or the force main to a pretty critical point. However, if you upgrade that force main at some point in the near future, that eases off on the pumps and actually, I will say, restores some capacity back to the pumps into the system. So there's some incremental parts and pieces to this as you go along, depending on how much capacity you're adding to the system over time. Industrial lab pump station, similar story. That pump station takes 90% of the flow from the town of Williston. Currently nearing 100% capacity. I think it's at 82% capacity right now. So if you're thinking in terms of state of Vermont EPRs, that's the time when you need to start planning for what an upgrade looks like. Planning for upgrades again, pump station costs about $640,000. That's pump upgrades. Force main upgrade, that's also a 10-inch force main. That's also a constrained force main. There's a capital project that Bruce and we have been working on to upgrade the force main over there, so that's in the works already, so that's already going in the pipeline. And then, as we said earlier, the Blair Park and the Taft Farms pump stations, those pump stations serve smaller areas, and under the current build-out analysis, they didn't require upgrades based on the projected flows. Last one for me, I think.
Thank God.
So with the TIF district, we're looking at, this is sort of a list of priorities. River Cove Pump Station, that's partially underway. Force main, River Cove Force main would be the next critical infrastructure upgrade. Industrial lab force main, Industrial lab pump station. Then later down the road, Horseshoe Lane, Lamplight Acres, O'Brien Court, two. Without the TIF district, in general, you still have the concerns over the River Cove Pump Station, the Industrial lab force main.
So next we'll kind of look at, hearing about that public infrastructure potential costs and then understanding potential development growth pattern. And for the purpose of these numbers, the total public infrastructure costs, we just used everything that was estimated for this. Obviously there could be different variations of that based on build out, but just to kind of put it all out there with one number and kind of illustrate what that looks like, that we use that full number. But this overview will give you just kind of an idea of all the different pieces of all these components, and obviously there's a lot more thought that the town will need to be thinking about.
But I appreciate that we're looking at this in conjunction with the TIF, but any combination of half of the build-out of Taft's Corners in roughly, it's not even a quarter retail and 3/4 housing will get us to this exact same place.
Yeah, it seems like, the critical takeaway, we've been planning on that, really the River Cove force main upgrade.
Yeah.
And when that's going to occur, and starting to think about that as we've done the work here with this study, as we, that's a bigger number. So taking some time to think about how we're going to be planning for that moving forward, no matter what we do.
If we were just getting going in the budget season, you would have certainly seen the River Cove force main as one of the capital items to start putting money, and we have some of that anyway,
Yeah.
but to really start getting that one going, because you don't have any choice. That force main gets inspected once every 5 years. It was just done last year. But if you look at the original plans for it, it shows it buried. It ain't buried anymore. It's on the river bottom. It's in concrete, so I don't know, but the plan shows it literally poured under the river. We would hire divers to check it. You don't need a diver, you can walk across and see the fire. So,
Is it safe if I say, of all our infrastructure that is we'd rank that like near, if not the top, our critical public infrastructure, that force main in the river.
No doubt. Yeah. I mean, that's your lifeline, that's your connections.
Yeah.
Without it.
That's the scariest pump station we have. I mean, industrial ag at 90%, but, you know, you lose River Cove. We have bypass pump capacity, ability, but,
If you lose the force main.
well, that's right.
Yeah, so,
That's why I.
you know, just so the board is aware of that.
Okay, so this is the part where I'm scared about that, but I do want to make sure that we're talking about this in conjunction with the TIF, but the TIF is just a way of getting to this problem faster
Yeah.
than if otherwise. Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, this goes back to Brian.
Okay, so, as our technical experts here have described, the system upgrades have been quantified as to what level of investment is needed. This is where I want to mention something that is a little bit wonky and complicated, the notion of proportionality, and I think it's really important to note that just because TIF is available to facilitate development doesn't mean it's a tool to cover the whole cost of a municipality's infrastructure. There's got to be a proportionality. So for instance, the way I think I could illustrate proportionality is if a new development was going to go into the TIF district and it was going to generate, 20% of the new load, the new capacity was needed, it would be a 20% financing scenario. So if it was $1 million project, 200,000 would be appropriate for TIF. That's the basic gist of proportionality. You can't over-subsidize public infrastructure that's not connected to the new development that needs the infrastructure with TIF. So we didn't go into that level of detail too much, but I just wanted to note that it's not a meal ticket. Very good. So you'll see here what we did was take the wastewater upgrades at 7.8 million, the Trader Lane funding gap, coming up with a 2025 estimate or ballpark of 10.3 million.
That's the cost of the road that we don't already have? Is that what that is?
Correct.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because there were some impact fees, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's basically after the impact fee. And so what we do is take an annual inflation factor. It's just safe to do with construction estimates. As everyone knows, if you get an estimate a few years later, it's really not that valuable because it's gone up. Things don't go the other way. Miraculously, they never go down. Gets you out of 2027 cost of $11,600,000 to do these projects. That based on your tax rate and based on the 70% of the education tax rate increment going into the TIF fund and 85% municipal, results in basically a development that would have to generate $51 million in new value for the numbers to work. So that, I can go over it again, but basically, in order to have enough incremental value, after applying those ratios of 70% in ed fund, 85% in municipal, to service an $11.6 million bond, you would need $51 million in new value from the increment to service that bond. So that's an order of magnitude. That's a fairly large number. I actually don't know what Finney Crossing, for instance, is assessed at. You probably do.
Yeah, I provided a couple bullets at the bottom of this slide just to give some perspective. So again, back to those rectangles we mapped, the sort of the average Finney or Cottonwood building. To generate $51 million in new taxable value, you need 10 to 15 of those buildings.
I just heard that we have to do some of this wastewater work anyway, because we're over that 80 or 90%. But even though proportionality, you would say 100% of it could go to the TIF district? Could.
No, it would not be able to go to the TIF.
What's this wastewater system component, 7.8 million? Isn't that what you get when you add up
That's the
everything?
math. I'm trying to show you
Yeah.
sort of what it would require to
Okay.
do that. So you're right. That's an important distinction here. Is this doesn't back out proportionality. This doesn't get to the question
Okay.
of proportionality. So the numbers would be, you'd have, I don't know what that proportionality would look like
Right,
for this
yeah.
project.
That is why I was asking about what is the size of the, just that proportionality was where my head was at.
Yeah, so
In those questions.
We would struggle to meet proportionality big time.
we don't have a slide on this. Bruce did do some work trying to apportion the fair share to the Trader Lane TIF. It was about 70%. So the first thing is these upgrades that we're talking about, only get us so far. And then if you really build out Trader Lane fully, that's about 70% of what these upgrades would cover. So you could run this, Brian, at 70% of the 7.8 million and
Is that accurate math? It's
get roughly there.
7.8 million is the total upgrade cost, and you estimate that 70% of that is related to the development that would occur
in the district. Yep.
Okay.
So we could dial it down a little bit, but it's still,
That's helpful. That is helpful for sure. So, again, back to the notion that you have to have a development proposal rather than let's hope that they'll build it, let's build the infrastructure and hope they will follow. It's not the model that works with Vermont. It's just not how it works.
yeah. And so my final bullet there that I added is about, well, what has been proposed in this area. So we have a permit for a small grocery store that hasn't been acted on. And then if you followed the planning commission at all, we've had a hotel developer who's been interested in a hotel that would fall within the district along Trader Lane. But looking at what happened to assessments when things like that were built in Finney Crossing, together that's roughly $10 million in added taxable value between the store and the hotel. If it were to bring value similar to what Healthy Living and the Town Place Suites brought to the town when those two things were built.
And just because I'm spinning on going around in circles, but the 10 to 15 new mixed 3-story buildings, is that, how does that compare to the numbers you used to figure out how much more sewage capacity you needed?
It's fewer than the whole 199,000.
Yeah.
I couldn't tell you if it's half. It might be half.
Oh, okay.
But it's if you were to imagine that map with the orange streets on it, it's a full build out of 1.5 to 2.5 of those blocks. So if you imagine a block might hold somewhere between 4 to 6 of those buildings, it's 2 to 2.5 of those to get that number of buildings. And so we always look at the block behind Hannaford as sort of a likely first candidate because Merchants Row already exists and Wright Ave can be extended, and then Trader Lane forms another side of it. So it's a block of that size, 400, 450 feet on a side, and then it's a couple other blocks like that, all building out pretty rapidly. This is that first project idea, right, Brian? So we're talking about what we'd want to see coming online quite quickly after the establishment of the district.
But would that be a but-for issue if they're already permitted?
It could be. I mean, the hotel has been conceptual. The store is permitted, probably would have to be re-permitted to build at this point. Part of why the store is not happening is because it's not served by a Trader Lane.
Fair.
The folks who would like to occupy that store see the need for better vehicular circulation to make it work. So
what's needed is 51 million. What's currently being discussed is 10.
yes. Yeah.
But there's absolutely the potential to get the 51 million
The space is there.
with the space.
The zoned capacity, the permit capacity is there. If somebody showed up and said, this is the kind of project I'm interested in getting off the ground, that might be a little different conversation or an advancement of this conversation.
And have you had conversations with developers or owners, landowners that'd be willing to do that? Or I know it's not like at the stage of permitted, but
There's
is there?
there's vague interest.
Okay.
But we're in an interesting environment. Costs are quite high right now. Chittenden County apartment vacancy rates have gone from that historic low of 1.8% up to 3.6%, and nobody's sure what the absorption is going to look like on that. Is that a very short-term thing, and then everything fills back up and we're back down under 2%. Money's tough to find, interest rates, et cetera, et cetera. So, what our developers all tell us is, gosh, it's really tough right now. They never tell us it's easy.
They're not going to tell you if you build it, we will come.
I think momentum would certainly help here, though. And that is part of it that we'll kind of transition into talking about is, we think that some development would beget other interest. And one of the challenges of this quadrant is we're going essentially from a completely non-residential build-out today to a mixed-use pattern, where if we go to the other side, to the Finney and Maple Tree Place area, we've essentially, since anything was built there, we've had mixed use. Who wants to be the first apartment building, in between Bed Bath & Beyond and Hannaford? As a planner, I look at the location and think there's a whole lot of advantages to that, plus just the advantages of being in Taft Corners. But I think if somebody sees some success there, and we have had larger developers who have come in and looked at, a full block build out of areas like that and talked to us about that before. At the time, there were some concerns about the way the town grants sewer allocation. Different conversation for a different night. One the planning commission would like.
We can only have so much sewer in one night.
Sorry, we'll try to keep it reasonable.
Somebody had to break the barrier.
We're talking about pulling things through straws, and
Yeah, I know, that's where I was
really,
trying to keep my face.
We can kind of move into that if you and Brian are ready, but just.
By the way, I get 37 million when we take that number down, so that's better than 51.
And that 7.8 number, that's everything kind of that full growth center
Right.
build out too. And Brian, I need a couple for that, that more quadrant partial that may not need to occur. But so that just number assumed kind of everything is to put it all there. But there's.
Oh, wait, so this was the 400? These numbers, this build-out plan that we went through was the 400-ish? I have no idea what units we're using, but I had.
So the full build-out capacity was 377,000.
Right.
That was all 4 quadrants. And then the partial build-out, which was just trailer lane, was 198,000.
Mm-hmm.
The full build-out impacted each one of the critical gravity sewer segments and triggered upgrades at both of the pump stations,
Yep.
Industrial Avenue and Cove. That's the 7.8.
Yep.
Okay.
In the partial build-out, you drop off Lamplight Acres and the O'Brien, those get pushed out to the 2045 to the design year. So that's less of an impact
1.2
throughout the
and
development.
1.3.
Yeah, so you're looking at $2.5 million.
Yeah.
Less of an immediate impact, right,
Yeah.
within the next 20-year period.
Come on, Bruce,
just
you
wanted
and
to
I are not
flag
going to
that
be here in
side.
2045.
I just want to flag that because there's a lot of variables here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just gives you one illustration, but that number is, we can keep working that number as we keep talking. So that should just into CHIP, which the board's heard about a little bit.
Chip was just talking about CHIP. Ellie looked at me like, this isn't TIF. This is a form of TIF. Community and Housing Infrastructure Program is the newest tool for advancing housing development throughout the state. It's really intended to be more of a manageable tool than TIF. TIF's quite involved and more complicated. CHIP has a lot of the same concepts, but I think most important is it's specific to a site or development opportunity, not an entire district. So it's a lot more, just overall, it's more doable, more manageable as a tool. You may just look at the types of things it finances in support of housing, water, wastewater, roads, stormwater, utilities, which aren't mentioned here, but that's included. Even land acquisition, brownfield remediation is included. So it does cover quite a bit. Towns that have limited capacity can use outside vendors to prepare applications and handle administration of a CHIP. Developers are able to do the financing. It doesn't require a municipal bond. That has some real benefits to a municipality. actually construct the infrastructure. In some instances, the developer may end up owning and retaining ownership of infrastructure. Not all, but some. And I think it's implied, but you know, it's not a situation where you need to keep sort of advancing growth, or I should say, growth is not required for the model. The financial model should work with that one development. It doesn't rely on other growth in the district. It relies on that project happening and meeting the market projections for prices, rents, sale prices, and whatnot. So that's CHIP in a nutshell.
So we'll kind of land things this evening. I think, you know, a takeaway for the board as you're thinking about this, we looked at kind of that larger district model, and as we've talked about, you need that new taxable value to come in to make it work, and for that to happen, you need kind of a first project that's imminent. We don't have that today. Not to say that couldn't happen, and we couldn't reopen this a bit in the future, but you know, to make these numbers work, we need to balance the equation. We have a private development, you know, not the building they will come. We have to have these agreements up front. Just to kind of outline that piece, but you know, as we're continuing to think about Trader Lane and what's next steps there, we can continue to advance that project. It does need permitting. We can continue to move it along, thinking about that a bit as we need to figure out how to close that funding gap. We're continuing to think about CHIP projects, capacity to manage it in-house. I'll let you touch on a couple of these. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I'll toss it to you guys back.
Sure. So, you know, we continue to build our capacity to take on more creative finance mechanisms, and thinking about, you know, we've got a working group or two going on in the town at this point about how we would deal with being approached with a CHIP project, you know, working through the manager's office, planning and zoning and finance. We're continuing to pursue what's called Tier 1A status in our growth center, soon to be renamed to something else. That would bring Act 250 permitting in-house, co-located with local permitting. That includes permits to build a road. So could help us with Trader Lane there. Like Eric said, you know, trying to balance this equation, are there other ways to pay for some of the components of the sewer system? And I noted out, you know, impact fee, because when I mentioned in the room, let's just double the connection fee, that was an unpopular statement. But, you know, how do you fund infrastructure sometimes? You bond for it, or you anticipate the cost, and then you charge an impact fee that's proportional to each new gallon's proportional contribution to the need to make the improvement. So you can't use impact fees to catch up. You can use them to expand based on anticipated service demand. That might be something to think about. Getting things on the capital budget schedule, thinking about the sequencing of the various components, and then smaller bites from different sources. So whether it's a smaller bite of the overall sewer infrastructure challenge and taking these on, you know, a project at a time, and maybe addressing how they're funded in different ways as well. And then for Trader Lane, looking at some other funding sources. So Eric mentioned pursuit of permitting. This remains a priority project within the Northern Borders Economic Development Funding Package, but that's federal money, requires going through the NEPA process, National Environmental Policy Act. That in and of itself costs time and money. Should we pursue that, thinking about approaching that funding source? Same thing with just about any kind of congressionally directed spending. You may hear about solicitations for CDS projects come out. Federal money, it's going to come to you through a program. It may come with some strings that you have to be prepared to address. So it's sort of a not closing out any particular idea about how to crack this, but it may be a combination of strategies to get the road off the ground and get some development going along it.
Those are our slides. As you know, we've dug into this a lot to really think about investment in infrastructure, wastewater component that's going to be there no matter what. You know, some of these capital planning elements, that's good capital planning that we're looking at. Say we're trying to test that, you know, initial viability. You know, there's a potential pathway at some extent, but we don't have the private project today. But not to say it could materialize in the future. So our thought at the staff level is we can continue to be working on this, thinking about other ways to achieve this, and continue discussions with the select board to maybe dig into some more of these strategies and capital planning ideas and economic development ideas here moving forward. But that was a good point in time to share with the board what we've learned, and thanks to our team who's put a lot of great work into this to just kind of get us to this understanding of what we're doing today.
The one thing I don't quite understand is there's a lot of municipalities who have used the TIF program. They end up with some really nice things like new libraries and new boardwalks at the waterfront. And I mean, are they just spending the increased property value, the tax they're going to get? How do they do that? Oh, do we do all this work and we're going to end up with a road and a better sewer system?
Public facilities are eligible. South Burlington's had a proportionality component, whereas only like 20%, or I think, was be able to be TIF funded.
So like 20% of their library could have got funded through the TIF or something like that. Okay.
Yeah, it just becomes part of that stack of capital as opposed to the primary source, which you think of infrastructure, you don't want to go out and chase a lot of different sources, and so they're complicated enough to do those projects, critical infrastructure that we're talking about. But if you're looking at other, recreation facilities, things like that, it's definitely a little bit of a harder case to make.
Yeah, I would think so. That's why I was kind of surprised.
And clearly under CHIP, there's some, if you had like a shared use path that ran through a property that's got housing, you could include some portion of that, as an example. There is a development in Sarah's Corners that's envisioned, Sarah's Park, and the access to CHIP, and the interested to the public components as well that aren't, pipes and roads being covered.
CHIP does not have a proportionality component.
Okay. Eric, I think I've got my, because it's an important number that you don't need to answer this, but I would like to see it kind of thought through. I'm not really sure that the 70% proportionality makes sense if the $7.8 million is for 387. What unit am I talking about? 387 million gallons?
But if full build out means that like most of the other three quadrants are built out already, and most of it could happen, like 70% of the new building could happen in that area. That's how I understood it.
But if the $8 million is for 400, I'll use easier, and we're only building 200, then I don't know how you could possibly charge TIF district with more than half,
Fair.
and then.
Fair.
And then maybe even have to lose some of that because we're already above that 80 or 90%. So, but anyways, if that number comes way down, that makes us a lot more viable.
Right.
And this is, you should all know that I have changed myself. I've gone 180 degrees on TIF districts. I was like, why in the world do we want to do that? But Matt keeps showing me pretty pictures of what it would look like. No, I think if you could get it to be viable, I could kind of see the risk to the municipal, because we have to borrow. Making sense for that area because it's not developing, it's just sitting there.
Yeah, I think it looks like right-sizing how much of the project can be funded by TIF against how much development you can reasonably expect, to have committed.
Right, yeah.
So you've got to bring those into an alignment that you're confident of.
Yeah, the wastewater component here is, as I've tried to wrap my head around it, just becomes that really interesting variable to be discussing with the flow projections, and then when that kind of trips the system, and when to be aware of that, and how to use these tools and development to get to those points. And then, your point, what's the risk assessment by the select board on when to use TIF for these projects, and knowing at a certain point, you do some parts of the system, you're going to need more parts of the system at another point too. But it all comes down to good capital planning.
Yeah, I don't know why we wouldn't do, even with this level of detail, could we talk about the impact fee? Because that seems like a pretty important thing to start thinking about sooner rather than later. And then I assume if you had something in the TIF district that took that into account, you would not double charge them somehow. But
all these tools and variables here becomes all for us at the staff level to look and see if we could bring something that's viable to the select board and say, here's how we think we could do it, here's how we
Yeah.
modeled it, more granular, and should give you a good baseline of all these elements we need to talk about moving forward. I have one hand raised online.
Yeah,
From
let's-
Dylan, who was on our DR.
Dylan.
Hey Dylan, if you're there still, I can connect you with your question or comment.
Hey there, can you hear me? All right, fantastic. So, I love the idea of TIF and chip financing. I think it's really progressive. The one thing I'm really worried about, especially with Trader Lane, is the drag on property values that comes from the Bed Bath and Beyond. Has the town explored any public-private sponsorship there to renovate the Bed Bath and Beyond to make it a more like higher utility or more varied space? Anything like a food hall or an open indoor market concept, something that could have, more reasonable amount of businesses filling that space rather than waiting for a big box to eventually come in. I feel like if we could reutilize that specific building, it would increase the likelihood of residential properties being built next to it. Considering right now, just a big open storefront with nothing there would kind of scare me off from future development nearby.
Good question. I don't believe we've been approached with any concept like that. Matt, anything that's come up in your office or?
No, what I understand is the landowner has generally looked at other, large format retailers to occupy the space. When we started the journey talking about rewriting the zoning for Taft Corners, and, going to the form-based code and imagining greater residential density and mixed use in the area, I think I showed the select board a slide of the, at that time, empty Bed Bath & Beyond. So this would have been, 2020, 2019, maybe, with the Spirit Halloween banner on it. And I called that out as this is a challenge. This is an indicator of that shifting retail landscape. We haven't built a new big box store in Williston in over 30 years, and we have one or sometimes two at a time that are empty because the format is really challenged. And I pitched form-based code and the reworking of Taft Corners to the select board partially under this idea of economic resilience, and that kind of the reverse of what Dylan is saying would hopefully happen. That is, so much other stuff would grow up around an empty Bed Bath & Beyond that it would become a no-brainer to repurpose that site or that building. That's my best guess of how this goes. Buildings hang out for a really long time in Vermont. Stuff gets redeveloped quite slowly. The math of it has to just be incredibly compelling for someone to rework a building that significantly. So I love the idea of a creative reuse of a big box. There's some really cool examples of that. I'd love to see that happen. I do think that would encourage transformation of the rest of the street and development along the street. But I'm not going to tell anybody I think it's likely right now because it's pretty rare.
And we don't own the building.
We don't own the building, and that, that's another challenge of having hopes and dreams for Taft Corners is we own almost none of it, and have the power of zoning, the power of making public investment, and the power of persuasion, such as it is, and that's it.
That's what we have for the board this evening.
Yeah, so there's no formal action required on this tonight, but certainly if anybody has any other questions, what would you perceive as the next steps for us as the board?
Good question. I think at the staff level, we can kind of work through these numbers a little bit more with some concepts and think about some of these other potential tools that are out there, kind of flesh those out and do a little more research and kind of think of how the progression could be here. We continue to talk with the private development community as well to try to see if there's interest in engaging in a project with a public-private partnership. Matt and I have kind of kept that ongoing the last couple of years here and just seen more more staff time and attention towards that part of the work. The town's looking to pursue that public-private partnership. Really that strong connection with the public and the private sector is critical there. Those lines of communication open. But so if there's any thoughts from the board about things you would like to see to follow on this as well, please let me know. We'll bring that to you.
If we were to, kind of put TIF on the back burner for now and focus more on the chip aspect, if there were a developer were to come to us and say, hey, if we can make Trader Lane happen, I want to build this project, how quickly could we get that TIF ball rolling again?
Look to my colleagues here. Stuff.
I mean, we have to basically brush off a lot of the work that's been done and just get right back to it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it could happen. I mean, we've done this part now, so we're not having to kind of go through these processes, so it could happen quickly.
Relatively.
All right.
I mean, an application is not an overnight process.
Right.
Yeah, even with Ellie here, I'll say it's not simple. It's not a simple thing to get through.
Right, yeah.
Chip is brand new. I don't think an
Yeah.
application is in yet. I think it's pretty close.
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. So,
Okay.
working on a couple of them.
Any other questions from the board?
Oh, thank you very much.
yeah.
It was
Thank
really,
you for all your
really
work.
informative.
Represents a massive amount of work from a lot of folks, so thank you all.
Yep.
Team, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
And Greta, this is usually your thing, your jam, this stormwater, this
The
wastewater.
wastewater, I know,
Yeah,
well, it is overwhelming.
I know, it's hard when you have to be the chair. You can't ask all your good questions.
Yeah,
Bruce, before you go, we've got one other thing we want to do.
yeah, you can stay for a little bit, Bruce. So that actually brings us to the manager's report, which
Maybe we jump to other
I'm gonna jump to other business, all right, we'll do it. So, under the other business, we do, in honor of this being your last meeting, I mean, unless you wanna come back, always welcome to, in front of us, we do have a resolution from the Williston Selectboard in honor of your many years of your public service and your impending retirement. So I will read that resolution. Whereas Bruce K. Hoare will retire on July 31st, 2026, after serving the Williston Public Works Director for over 16 years and over 30 years in the profession, and whereas the position of Public Works Director is charged with professional oversight of all public infrastructure in the community, ensuring its safe operation, and whereas Mr. Hoare has served the community with dedication and an unwavering commitment to the public and town staff, and whereas during his tenure as director, Mr. Hoare played a critical role in several major town initiatives, including the creation of a stormwater utility, construction of a new public works facility, sidewalk and path projects, and major water and sewer infrastructure upgrades. And whereas as director, Mr. Hoare made a profound impact in the community, helping serve hundreds of community members in both big and small ways. And now therefore be resolved, the Williston Select Board sincerely thanks Bruce K. Hoare for his many years of dedication and service to the community of Williston as its Director of Public Works and wishes him the very best in his retirement. Adopted this day on June 20, 2026.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Been a good run. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bruce, for
you.
everything. It has been an absolute pleasure.
I appreciate the support. I've with you, been here a little bit longer now. I've got good support from the board and Brett and Ted. Those two have been around a little bit longer. I've always said I'd never play poker with Ted. But I always felt comfortable coming in here and presenting whatever it was, whether it was a good issue or not.
Yeah.
Good support from you guys, so thank you.
Thank you, Bruce.
You made us all highly invested in wastewater management.
Yeah.
So. That is no small task.
That's for sure.
So, with that, we will circle back to the manager's report.
Yeah, I'll just highlight one thing, two things quick. Independence Day celebration is this weekend. I'm looking forward to that. big event for our community, thanks to our team that pulls that off, a lot of volunteer work, between the library book sale, the race coming up, the parade, the fireworks, so it's definitely a team effort. And Todd, he plays a tremendous role in his staff and working with our volunteers, so it's coming up. Also, with the weather coming up this week, everyone to just be aware of the extreme heat. Our library serves as a community cooling shelter. We've been working to remind folks of that during library hours and encourage folks in the community to need a place to cool off. Our library is available for the public for that. And then with the library tomorrow night as well, there'll be a joint meeting in this room with the design committee and the library trustees for an update on where they are in that process. And I think they'll have an initial estimate number, if not at that meeting, at your meeting the following Tuesday. So that's a check-in for the trustees with their design committee to come with consensus about what they want to talk to you about next Tuesday.
That's a trustee meeting, right?
Yep, it'll be a trustee meeting. So I'll be in this room tomorrow night, and I'll plan to get that information transmitted to you probably Friday this week. And then that will be a big part of your agenda next Tuesday to have that design overview, some feedback from the trustees there as we look for that process to need to set that bond information by July.
And is there any additional other business?
I do have two catering, or let's see, two renewals that are a little off cycle that Sarah handed me today for liquor licenses. Actually, you know what? I'll just hold on these till next time because we like to put them on the agenda.
Sure.
So they're not critical to do tonight, so let's do them next week.
All right.
So that's all I have.
And that will bring us to final thoughts on agenda items. The all whopping 2 agenda items.
Did you, the last meeting when we talked about final thoughts, you were going to send a letter to our friends, it was only last week though, so maybe you haven't got it done yet, to our,
Department of Homeland
Yes,
Security.
thank you.
Yep.
I've been working on it to figure out who to send it to. I am, I'm looking at that still, and I think I'm looking at the August date for just the way the agenda's been set up. That's my plan, and get something out next week there. Just trying to figure out who to direct it to.
yeah, I understand that, yeah.
Yeah.
And I did remember after the meeting that there was sort of a particular ask to invite them to a meeting and put it on our agenda, knowing they're unlikely to come, but to be a very firm marker that they have not answered affirmatively.
Right,
Yes.
right. Yeah, so so I talked with Ted about just setting that date, and that is part of the communication. So
Great, thank you.
trying to figure out the right place to direct it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, and then with that brings us to an anticipated executive session. And there's a motion.
I move to find that premature public knowledge regarding a contract and labor relations agreement with employees would clearly place the town at a substantial disadvantage, and further move that we enter executive session to discuss a contract and labor relations agreement with employees under Title I, Sections 313A, 1A, and B, and invite Town Manager Eric Wells to join both discussions.
Just to clarify, the executive session I have materials for is not related to employees directly? It's still a contract. Are we still okay?
Yes, not related to, just the overall contract
Okay,
with the organization.
Yeah.
yes.
Is there a second?
I second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Ayes have it. And we will not be returning into open session as no substantive decisions will be made.